News of the Times. The death of Ellen Warder, a Victorian poisoning mystery and true crime from 1866. Tonight, we begin in Brighton in the summer of 1866, where a newly married woman, Mrs. Ellen Warder, fell suddenly and inexplicably ill. For 14 days, she was attended constantly by her husband, a respected medical man, before dying in circumstances that no one present could satisfactorily explain. Her decline was abrupt. Her symptoms were unusual, and the doctors who examined her could find no clear natural cause. At first, her death might have been regarded as one of those sad misfortunes that Victorian households endured too often. But as the inquest began, a troubling detail emerged. Ellen's husband, Dr Alfred William Warder, had been widowed twice before, and both earlier wives had also died suddenly and without convincing explanations. It was only when investigators began looking into Ellen's final days that these earlier tragedies surfaced. Quiet entries into parish records, half-remembered accounts, and financial arrangements that had allowed Dr. Warder to live comfortably without maintaining a full medical practice. With 3 wives dead under similar circumstances, coincidence became far more difficult to accept. Ellen's organs were sent to London to the laboratory of Dr Alfred Swaine Taylor, the leading toxicologist of his age. His analysis would determine whether this was a natural death or something far darker. But before Dr Taylor's findings could be returned, the case took an unexpected turn. Dr Warder himself died suddenly during the course of the inquiry, bringing further attention to the unresolved questions surrounding his wife's final illness. His death did not conclude the investigation. If anything, it ensured that the inquest proceeded with even closer scrutiny. Tonight, we follow the unfolding inquiry that began with one woman's mysterious illness and quickly broadened into a far larger question. How many unexplained deaths can lie behind a single man before the pattern demands to be seen? We end, as always, with a lighter note in our end of episode for the particular segment, a report from the Illustrated Police News on an umbrella of such startling energy that half of Regent Street took evasive action. So, settle yourself comfortably and prepare to be transported to Brighton in the summer of 1866, a place of sea air, genteel lodging houses, and medical attentions that may or may not have been entirely advisable. For tonight's story, we recommend brewing your own tea rather than leaving it in the hands of others. From the Brighton Guardian, 11th of July 1866, suspicious death of a physician's wife at Brighton. On Wednesday evening last, the Borough Coroner D. Black Esquire held an inquest at the Olive Branch Inn in Silwood Street on the body of Mrs. Helen Vivian Warder, aged about 36, and wife of Dr. Alfred William Warder. In 1858, he is described as residing at Urtbridge, in 1859 at Ottery St Mary in Devonshire, and in the 1860 at Hutton Super Edge in Leicestershire. It appears that he had taken up his residence in Brighton about 2 months past. The interest in the case gives rise to the additional fact that his wife was the eldest daughter of Major Bramwell of R.B. Mauritia, stationed at Carisbrooke Road in Hove, a gentleman who once held the post of Major in the Brighton Artillery Volunteers. The subjoined evidence shows that the deceased lady died at number 36 Bedford Square, where her husband and herself took lodgings on the 23rd of May last. About a month since, she was attacked with illness and was at first treated by her husband, Mr. Bramwell, and members of his family visited the deceased, and Mr. Bramwell called in the aid of Dr. Taff. Dr. Taff administered various remedies without success, and finding that he could not account for the disease by any natural cause, he communicated this fact to Mr. Bramwell. It was then agreed that on Sunday morning they could not come up to a more decided conclusion as to the diagnosis of the case. Another medical man would be called in. On the Sunday morning, however, Mrs. Warder died. Dr. Warder, on the suggestion of the friends of the deceased, consented to a post-mortem examination. This was made by Dr. Taff and two other medical men. They all agreed that death is not to be accounted for on natural causes. The viscera has been placed at Professor Taylor's for analysis, and the inquest is adjourned. There were several medical men present and others present during the investigation, which seemed to draw its greatest interest. Mr. Stukeley, solicitor, attended to watch the case on behalf of Dr. Warder. Dr. Warder was not present nor represented, and it was said that since the death of the deceased he had left his lodgings seriously unwell. From the very first session of the inquest, one fact stood out starkly. None of the attending physicians could identify a natural cause for Ellen Warder's death. No one. 3 doctors performed the post-mortem. 3 doctors declared themselves unable to explain her symptoms, and all 3 agreed, cautiously but firmly, that her death could not be accounted for by disease. This was not a verdict Victorian families accepted lightly. To state openly that a woman's illness defied all natural explanation, to open the door to one conclusion only: poisoning. And although no one dared say the word aloud, not yet, the inquiry was already bending in that direction. The absence of Dr. Warder did not go unnoticed. He did not attend the inquest. He did not send a medical colleague in his place. He did not even provide a written statement. Instead, a solicitor appeared to watch the case on his behalf, while rumours circulated that the doctor had left his lodging house and taken to his own bed, seriously unwell. This struck observers as convenient. Others thought it suspicious, and Ellen's family, who had pressed for the post-mortem, began to wonder whether her illness had been managed or created by the very man who now refuses to face the coroner's court. Meanwhile, the most important evidence of all had already left Brighton. Ellen's organs were on their way to London, to the chemical laboratory of Dr. Alfred Swaine Taylor, whose verdict would soon determine whether this was a tragic mystery or something criminal. When Ellen and Dr. Warder arrived in Brighton in late May of 1866, there was no hint of tragedy in the air. The seaside town was at its best, the weather mild, the lodging houses bright with summer visitors, and the couple settled into their number 36 Bedford Square with every expectation of a quiet, restorative stay. For Ellen, 37, accomplished, gentle in manner, and newly married, it was meant to be a period of rest. For her husband, it seemed an opportunity to introduce his young bride to her family in Hove and Penzance, and perhaps plan the long-intended journey to Italy to visit the children of his second marriage. But scarcely a month after their arrival, something changed. The unfortunate Mrs. Ellen Warder. Ellen Vivian Warder, who would for a brief and troubled season become Mrs. Ellen Warder, wife number 3, was born in Penzance, the youngest daughter of a well-respected merchant family. At 36, she occupied that delicate Victorian category of womanhood politely referred to as still unmarried, a condition that society regarded with something between pity and faint alarm. Yet Ellen was no retiring figure. She was intelligent, capable, and unusually well educated for her station. She had worked as a governess, travelled abroad, and spent time in Paris, refining her accomplishments. It was there, amid the busy salons and schoolrooms, that she formed a close relationship, one that would prove tragically significant, with a young woman who later became Dr. Alfred William Warder's second wife. That second Mrs. Warder did not live long. 8 months after her marriage, she died, leaving behind children who were sent to relatives in Italy. And so it was that Ellen, still corresponding warmly with her Paris friend, found herself redrawn into the orbit of Dr. Warder, widower, respectable medical man, and by all appearances a devoted husband, struck twice already by misfortune. Their friendship became an understanding, and the understanding became a marriage. Letters sent home to Cornwall announced the news with gentle surprise. No one had suspected an engagement, no hints had preceded it, but Ellen wrote glowingly of her new husband's affection, and her family, although startled, offered their full blessing. There was, however, one detail that unsettled them. It emerged quite quietly, almost as an afterthought, that Dr. Warder preferred the marriage not to be made public for 6 months or so. Why? He didn't fully say. Professional reasons were suggested. Family sensitivities implied. Ellen, although willing to marry privately, refused to keep it secret from her kin. Her letters told them plainly she was now Mrs. Warder. Financially, the match appeared favourable. Ellen brought £500 of her own money, a significant sum, roughly £78,000 in modern terms, and Dr. Warder, having ceased practice after his second wife's death, was understood to be a man of means. Socially, she had secured a comfortable position. Emotionally, her letters spoke of tenderness. And yet, beneath the surface of this respectable union, something did not sit entirely at ease. Her Paris friend, Dr. Warder's second wife, had been dead less than a year. Ellen stepped into the household almost before the mourning crape had faded. It was, as Victorians would have said, expeditious. But widowers with young children often remarried quickly. Society accepted that, even expected it. Nothing improper was openly suspected. Still, the speed of the new arrangement and the secrecy requested cast a faint, lingering shadow over what ought to have been, hopefully, a new life. When Ellen travelled to London, her sister Julia visited and found her content, if somewhat delicate in health. Later, in Brighton, relatives observed Dr. Warder's undivided, almost excessive attentiveness. He washed her face, combed her hair, and would not let her move lest she excite herself. He seldom left her bedside. To visitors, this devotion appeared touching, even admirable. To later investigators, it would acquire a more ambiguous tone. 2 days before her death, Ellen put on her bonnet, imagining she had been out. She sipped champagne, nibbled strawberries, and seemed suddenly improved. Hours later, she was gone, so swiftly, so unexpectedly, that even her own family was stunned. A woman of intelligence, friendship, and steady character, a late bride, a loyal friend to the wife who came before her, and at 36, a Victorian woman who should have had years ahead of her. Instead, her story ends in a Brighton lodging house under the watchful eye of a husband whose earlier domestic tragedies now seemed less like misfortune and more like a pattern. And thus Ellen Bramwell, the third Mrs. Warder, would become the centre of one of the era's most troubling inquests, her life overshadowed not only by her own mysterious death, but by the ominous question of what truly befell the wives of Dr. Alfred William Warder. Dr. Alfred William Warder, a Victorian gentleman of medicine, a mystery. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Alfred William Warder cut the figure of a respectable professional man, the sort of whom polite society accepted at face value. He held the London Society of Apothecaries licence from 1839, the membership of the Royal College of Surgeons from 1840, and he later acquired an MD from St Andrews. His early appointments gave him the sort of medical authority that Victorians seldom questioned. Lecturer in medical jurisprudence near St George's Hospital, and medical officer to the North District and Workhouse of St Luke's in Chelsea. He was on paper exactly what a gentleman physician of the era ought to be. Yet even in his professional life, Dr. Warder moved frequently. In 1858 he was listed at Uxbridge, in 1859 at Ottery St Mary in Devon, in 1860 at Hutton Super Edge in Leicestershire, and shortly before the events of 1866 he had taken a new residence in Brighton. In an age where stability was considered a hallmark of respectability, such restlessness raised quiet eyebrows. Still, nothing improper was ever formally attached to his name. He was a widower, twice widowed. In fact, a circumstance that drew sympathy rather than suspicion. His first wife died years earlier, leaving behind children who were sent abroad to Italy. His second wife, a young woman intimately connected with Ellen Bramwell during their shared education in Paris, survived her marriage a mere 8 months. These losses were spoken of as misfortunes of life, the tragedies that Providence might see fit to send to any household. After the death of his second wife, Dr. Warder retired from regular practice, a man of means. The papers suggested he had time, comfort, and notably no visible need to work. Yet barely a year later, he remarried. His new bride was Miss Ellen Bramwell, his late wife's intimate friend. Their shared acquaintance provided a tidy explanation, and Victorian society rarely scrutinised widowers too closely. But a quiet detail lingered. Dr. Warder expressed a preference that the marriage not to be announced for 6 months. He gave no firm reason. Professional concerns, perhaps, or family delicacies. It might, he hinted, be simply better not to excite the comment. Ellen declined secrecy and wrote home. Still, the request remained one of those faint, troubling notes in life's melody that only makes sense when heard again in hindsight. In Brighton, the couple presented the appearance of contentment. Dr. Warder was attentive exceedingly attentive, visitors saw a man devoted to his wife's comfort, never far from her bedside, ordering her rest, managing her medicines, controlling her movements with the gentle firmness of a man who believed he alone understood her ailments. To her family, his devotion was touching. To later observers, it seemed almost too unwavering, the watchfulness of a man who could not or would not leave her unattended. When Ellen fell seriously ill, an unusual occurrence, as Ellen was known to enjoy robust health all her life, he nursed her with relentless dedication. He sponged her face, arranged her pillows, combed her hair when she lacked strength to lift her arms. He administered medicines in doses larger than customary, explaining their necessity with the easy authority of a trained physician. 14 days he scarcely left the room. And then, after a sudden improvement, bonnet on, champagne taken, a few strawberries enjoyed, Ellen Bramwell Warder died with disquieting abruptness. The family, who believed her recovery was underway, was stunned. It was at this moment that the delicate edifice of Dr. Warder's domestic respectability began to fracture, as an inquest was begun and troubling facts surrounding her sudden inexplicable death surfaced. The first signs. Ellen, who had enjoyed steady, uncomplicated health all her life, first complained only of a vague restlessness, a nervous agitation her family considered nothing more than her temperament. Nothing in those early days suggested any danger. Her husband, a medical man of long experience, assured them he understood her constitution perfectly and would manage her case himself. And manage it he did. At first, no one questioned this. A doctor treating his own wife was entirely commonplace in a Victorian household. But as Ellen's symptoms shifted, growing stranger, sharper, and more resistant to treatment, a quiet unease began to settle over the rooms of number 36, Bedford Square. She must not be moved. When visitors were admitted, they found Ellen pale and listless, reclining almost constantly. Dr. Warder insisted she remain still. Any movement might excite her system. He washed her face, brushed her hair, arranged her pillows with unfailing tenderness. It looked like devotion, touching, even admirable, and the family said as much. But there was one detail that unsettled them, although none voiced it aloud at first. No one but Dr. Warder was allowed to administer her medicines. Not her sister Julia, not her father, not even another physician. Every draught, every powder, every mouthful of nourishment passed only through his hands. The family grows uneasy. Among Ellen's visitors were her brother, Mr. Richard Bramwell, himself a surgeon, and unlike the others, he read the signs with a professional eye. Each time he visited, Ellen seemed frailer. Her symptoms wandered from one system to another, and the remedies her husband used, sometimes stronger than customary, produced no predictable effect. To a surgeon, this was not the natural course of illness. This was something else. Bramwell pressed the matter quietly but firmly. An independent medical opinion must be sought, and so, on his instruction, Dr. Richard Patrick Burke Taff, a physician of solid standing, entered the case. His presence lent the situation a new gravity. A second opinion was ordinary. A surgeon brother insisting upon one was not. Dr. Taff examined Ellen, listened carefully, observed her distress, and, like Bramwell, found that nothing in her presentation aligned neatly with any recognised disease. When Dr. Taff first entered the house in Bedford Square, he found Ellen exhausted, trembling and deeply distressed, and yet nothing in her condition resembled a recognisable disease. Her symptoms drifted from one symptom to another with no coherent pattern. It was then that Dr. Warder offered what he believed to be the explanation. Ellen, he said, had suffered from hysterical attacks. Her current illness, he implied, should be understood in that light. In Victorian medicine, hysteria was a diagnosis so elastic that it could be stretched to cover almost any unexplained complaint. It often served as a polite curtain drawn across medical uncertainty, and, just as conveniently, it placed the responsibility for the illness upon the patient's nerves rather than her body. It also had another, subtler effect. It discouraged other physicians from probing too deeply into the husband's treatment. Dr. Taff, finding no clearer diagnosis, accepted the explanation provisionally. He continued to attend Ellen daily to the day of her death, as he later testified, but her symptoms refused to adhere to the framework he had been given. At every visit, the same puzzle confronted him. The medicines he prescribed produced no relief. Her condition grew more irregular rather than more defined, and the symptoms described by her husband did not always match what Taff observed at the bedside. What had begun as a convenient label, hysteria, began slowly to unravel. The remedies grew stronger, the symptoms grew stranger, and no treatment, however carefully chosen, made the slightest impression upon her suffering. By the end of that week, Taff was no longer merely puzzled, he was uneasy. From the Brighton Guardian, the 11th of July, 1866. Suspicious death of a physician's wife at Brighton. Richard Patrick Burke Taff, sworn. I'm a doctor of medicine and a master in surgery of the University of London. At about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was called by Mr. Bramwell, surgeon, who asked me to see his sister, Mrs. Warder, at number 36 Bedford Square. On the following day, I did so. I met Mr. Warder, the deceased, and her husband. Mr. Warder then complained of symptoms of constant desire to pass urine with great pain in the region of the bladder and neighbouring parts. I prescribed for her usual remedies for hysteria generally. When I first saw her, Dr. Warder told me he had been prescribing her 2 of Tracy's and Fleming's tinctures of aconite, the only remedies, he said, that the patient took. More troubling still, Warder volunteered descriptions of Ellen's symptoms that she herself appeared either too weak or too hesitant to confirm, particularly sensations of tingling, numbness, and throat constriction. Dr. Taff could only note what he was told and grew more uneasy when Ellen's condition stubbornly refused to align with any natural diagnosis. Dr. Taff continued, when I wrote the prescriptions, it was understood between myself and Dr. Warder that he would get them made up. Being a medical man, it was not unusual he should do so. Even this did not succeed in allaying the sickness. As the days lengthened into a second week, the tension inside number 36 Square sharpened. Ellen's decline had become unmistakable. Her symptoms rose and fell with no discernible pattern, and the remedies, both Taft's and Warder's, continued to fail. In the hallway outside her room, her family conferred in a low, urgent tone. If Ellen showed no improvement by Sunday morning, they agreed, a third medical opinion must be insisted upon. Another physician, another set of eyes. Something had to be done, but Sunday morning never brought that opportunity. Dr. Taft deposed, about a week previous to her death, her symptoms began to increase and the strangulatory returned in as violent a form as before. I attended her every day during the last week of her life, and on seeing her on Saturday last, between 3 and 4 o'clock, I was so suspect with her appearance that I said to her husband, and in her hearing, that I intended to call upon her brother and suggest that the assistance of another medical man in consultation with me in the case. When I saw Mr. Bramwell, I suggested that Dr. Webb, another medical man, should be associated with me. I requested Mr. Bramwell to see her that day. He was not attending her in a medical capacity, but simply seeing her as a brother. On Sunday morning, I was called from my own house at about 5:30 o'clock to attend a patient, and on my return home at 9 o'clock, or 9:30, I was informed that Mr. Bramwell had been for me at about 6 or 6:30. Some time afterwards I received a note from him in which he informed me that on his arrival in Bedford Square at 5:30 that morning, he having been sent for, he found his sister dead. It was Ellen's family who insisted upon a post-mortem. It was Ellen's family who demanded that the viscera be sent to London for toxicological examination, and it was Ellen's family who took their seats in the Olive Branch Inn when the inquest opened, determined that her death would not be dismissed as a vague and fashionable nervous collapse. From this moment onward, the domestic quiet of Bedford Square fell away, replaced by the formal machinery of inquiry. The doctors would give their evidence, the inconsistencies would surface, and behind every word spoken in that crowded room, the shadows of 2 earlier, equally sudden deaths would begin to gather. From the Brighton Guardian, the 11th of July, 1866, the suspicious death of a physician's wife at Brighton. Dr. Taft continued. On the Sunday forenoon, when I saw Mr. Bramwell, we at once went to Bedford Square and saw Dr. Warder. I suggested that there should be a post-mortem examination, and Dr. Warder said he had no objection. I asked Dr. Warder how she appeared to die. He said that she gradually got weaker and weaker, and told him that she had never felt so weak before in her life. I asked him if she had fainted suddenly or had any attack, violent difficulty of breathing, and he said no, she seemed gradually to get weaker and weaker and then died. He also said that for many or several, and I don't remember which, hours before her death, she had passed no urine whatever. The missing man. As the inquest gathered momentum, one absence became increasingly conspicuous. Dr. Alfred William Warder did not attend. He did not appear to hear the testimony of Dr. Taft, nor the concerns quietly raised by Ellen's brother, nor the coroner's remarks that 3 medical men had found no natural cause of her death. By this time, Warder had already been informed that Ellen's organs were being sent to London to the laboratory of Dr. Alfred Swaine Taylor, the preeminent toxicologist of the Victorian era. If poison was present, Taylor would find it. And so, while the inquest proceeded, Warder remained at his lodgings, the very rooms in which Ellen had died, declaring himself too unwell from grief to appear. But the explanation satisfied no one. The suspicions surrounding Ellen's death were now weighty enough that the police kept a discreet watch on the doctor, and Warder, fully aware he was being observed, grew increasingly withdrawn. It was what happened next that deepened the unease. Close to midnight, and without informing the family or the coroner, Dr. Warder quietly left his lodging house and took a room at a nearby hotel. To some, it appeared the behaviour of a man overwhelmed by tragedy. To others, it looked uncomfortably like a man attempting to evade what the morning might bring. From the Brighton Guardian, the 11th of July, 1866. In our sixth page, we found the report of an inquest on the body of Mrs. Warden, wife of a physician with whom she had been lodging at a house in Bedford Square. The lady had died under suspicious circumstances, and the medical men engaged in the case having refused to certify any natural cause of death. The coroner was communicated with, and the first stage of the inquiry opened. The facts then disclosed were of such a nature that Dr. Warder was placed under surveillance of the police. It was said that on the day of the inquest he applied to a Brighton chemist for some aconite, but the chemist refused to sell him any. Nothing particularly transpired since Monday morning, when the Chief Constable, Mr. George White, was in possession of the fact that Dr. Warder had gone by train to London, and in the evening intelligence was brought that he had returned. It appears he went back to his lodgings in Bedford Square, where he had remained since the death of his wife, and whence on Saturday he followed her corpse to the grave. There was nothing unusual in his demeanour, and when Miss Lansdell, the landlady, and her servant went to bed at about 11 o'clock on Monday night, he was in his sitting room. There is scarcely any doubt that as soon as he ascertained Miss Lansdell and the servant were gone to bed, he quietly let himself out by the front door, and for at 11:30 he entered the Bedford Hotel and asked for a bed. He was carrying a black bag and was taken by the servants to have just arrived in Brighton. When the room was wanted, he said he would go to bed at once and go upstairs directly. Yesterday morning his room was not vacated like the others throughout the hotel. As forenoon wore on, the lengthened stay of the new guest of course formed the subject of conversation and speculation amongst the servants, but it was not until 2 o'clock in the afternoon that any steps were taken. The discovery at the Bedford Hotel. It was not until the early afternoon that any concern arose at the Bedford Hotel. The new guest in the upstairs room, the man who had arrived quietly the night before with a small bag and gone directly to bed, had not emerged by the customary hour, nor responded to the usual knocks at his door. In due course, the hotel staff, acting with appropriate caution, entered the room. Inside, they discovered Dr. Alfred Warder unresponsive and believed to have passed away some hours earlier. His identity was not immediately known to the hotel, but a letter addressed to his landlady, Miss Lansdell, lay on the dressing table. When this was communicated to the Chief Constable, the connection with the ongoing inquest became clear. Medical men were called, and they determined that his death appeared consistent with the presence of a harmful substance found in the room. In his clothing were also discovered 2 pharmaceutical tablets of an opiate character, along with his watch, keys, and other personal effects. Meanwhile, back at Bedford Square, his absence had been noticed. His bed had not been slept in, and the front door had been left on the latch. Yet those in the house assumed he had gone out early and would return. Word of what had occurred came as a profound shock to all who knew him. Among the papers in the hotel room was a brief note requesting that a letter be forwarded to an acquaintance in Brompton, the final administrative act of a man who only days earlier had been at the centre of a complex and troubling medical inquiry. A timeline of events as reported at the time. As the inquest proceeded, newspapers compiled a chronology of the days surrounding Ellen Warder's illness and her husband's increasingly troubled state of mind. Set out briefly, the sequence ran as follows. Late May 1866, Dr. and Mrs. Warder arrived at number 36 Bedford Square. Ellen was at first merely unwell, but her condition gradually worsened. Her brother, Mr. Bramwell, concerned by the irregularity of her symptoms, requested the attendance of Dr. Taff, who began seeing her professionally. Saturday, the 30th of June. Ellen's deterioration prompted Taff to suggest bringing a third physician into consultation. He intended to speak with the family the next morning. Sunday, the 1st of July, before further help could be summoned, Ellen passed away in the early hours of the morning, her husband having remained with her throughout the night. Monday, the 2nd of July, the family resolved to seek expert guidance, and arrangements were made for a consultation with Professor Alfred Swaine Taylor of London, the foremost analytical specialist of the era. Tuesday, the 3rd of July, a post-mortem examination was conducted, and that same day Dr. Warder wrote to a relative of his first wife regarding practical matters connected with his children and household. Correspondence noted by the newspapers as unusually formal in tone. Wednesday, the 4th of July, the inquest opened. Witnesses later recalled that Warder appeared deeply distressed. After the jury withdrew, he was seen in a state of agitation, and a glass in the room was found broken. His landlady observed minor cuts on his face and neck, which she attributed to the incident. Contemporary reports commented that he was not himself during these days and was described as suffering bouts of severe sickness. His condition caused considerable concern among those keeping an eye on him. Saturday, the 7th of July, Ellen was buried. Warder, although in Brighton, did not attend the funeral. Sunday, the 8th of July, he remained inside his lodging house for most of the day, speaking little. Monday, the 9th of July, he travelled to London briefly, apparently to settle domestic affairs with a relative. Upon his return to Brighton, he paid his landlady, wrote several letters, including one to a family acquaintance abroad, and retired to his room for the evening. Later that night, after the household had gone to bed, he quietly left the lodging house and took a room at the Bedford Hotel. What followed became the subject of extensive newspaper coverage. Tuesday, the 10th of July. When the hotel staff were unable to obtain a response from his room the following day, medical assistance was sought. Dr. Warder was found deceased. Contemporary doctors believed the cause to be the presence of a harmful substance located in the room. No medical procedure could be attempted. While the inquest into the death of Ellen Warder continued, a second inquiry now opened, this time into the sudden death of Dr. Alfred William Warder himself. The two investigations proceeded side by side, each shedding light on the other, and as evidence was gathered for the coroner, a fuller and more troubling picture of Warder's domestic history began to emerge. It was disclosed that Ellen had not been his first wife, nor even his second. His first wife, Miss Gunning, had lived with him for several years, then separated, later returning to the household, and died within a matter of weeks. His second wife, Madame Valerie, survived only 8 months after their marriage, succumbing to symptoms described as strikingly similar to those of Ellen. None of these earlier deaths had attracted public scrutiny at the time, but now, placed beside the circumstances of Ellen's case, they could no longer be dismissed as mere misfortune. It was in this context, the sudden death of the doctor, the unfinished inquest into his third wife, and the re-examination of his past, that Ellen's brother, Mr. Richard Bramwell, became the first person to speak plainly. Summoned to identify Warder's body, he was asked by the coroner whether he believed any illness of the mind might have influenced the doctor's actions. His answer was direct. He had seen no such signs. Warder, he said, had always appeared calm, collected, and rational. And then, for the first time in the course of either inquiry, he stated openly that what had until that moment only been implied. He believed that Dr. Warder had taken the life of his sister. This testimony opened the most dramatic phase of the proceedings, the coroner's formal examination into the death of Dr. Alfred William Warder. From the Brighton Guardian, the 18th of July, 1866, the Warder tragedy. The verdict of wilful murder against Dr. Warder. Mr. Richard Bramwell was the first witness sworn. He deposed that he is a surgeon residing in Cambridge Row in Hove. The deceased had married his sister about 5 months ago. He was a doctor of medicine by profession. He didn't know the age of the deceased exactly, but thought him about 45 or 46. The marriage was without knowledge of our family, or without the idea that any such step was contemplated. And being an entire stranger to the family, he came to Brighton about the middle of May. My sister was then with him, but she died on the 1st of July. It is a fact that an inquest is now pending and not concluded on her body, also that an analysis of a portion of her remains is ordered by the coroner. I last saw Dr. Warder at the funeral of my sister on Saturday, but I did not speak to him. That was the last time I saw him alive. I identified the body lying upstairs as that of Dr. Warder. The coroner said, I think I must ask you this question. Have you ever observed him in any symptoms of insanity? The witness then said, Never. He was a remarkably cool and collected man. I never saw the slightest trace of insanity. The coroner replied, Do you believe him to be her murderer? The witness said, I do. While the inquest into Ellen's death remained open, the coroner now turned to the equally urgent question of how Dr. Alfred Warder himself had died, and whether his final actions revealed anything about his state of mind. The medical evidence was presented. Dr. Pickford, who had examined the doctor, reported a clear physical cause of death, a rapidly acting poison, identified through 2 independent chemical tests. There was no suggestion of natural illness, nor of confusion or delirium. Then came the evidence of behaviour. Witnesses from the Bedford Hotel described Warder's manner on the night he arrived: calm, composed, speaking clearly, settling his bill and giving instructions for the morning. His landlady and her servant at Bedford Square gave similar accounts. He appeared quiet, orderly, and entirely rational. Letters found in his room and others posted that day reinforced that impression. They were businesslike, coherent, and showed a precise understanding of his affairs. Arrangements for his property, instructions for the care of his children, and practical details that left little room to argue he was acting under any medical derangement. When asked directly, Ellen's brother, Richard Bramwell, surgeon, told the coroner that he had never observed in Warder the slightest sign of instability. Warder, he said, was always remarkably cool and collected. The coroner then directed the jury to consider two questions. What caused the doctor's death? The chemical evidence was clear. Was he of sound mind at the time? Every witness and every letter suggested he was. If the jury accepted both conclusions, the law required a specific verdict, one that Victorian juries did not return lightly. After only a short deliberation, the foreman announced the decision. The doctor had intentionally taken the substance that ended his life, and had done so while fully aware of his actions. It was, in the legal language of the day, a verdict of felo de se. The coroner concurred. With that, the proceedings closed, and attention returned with even greater urgency to the unfinished inquest on Ellen, the third Mrs. Warder, and to the troubling questions that now overshadowed all three of the doctor's marriages. The final day of the inquest on Mrs. Warder. The adjourned inquest into the death of Mrs. Ellen Vivian Warder assumed at the Olive Branch Inn, with the courtroom noticeably fuller than before. The death of her husband had cast a long shadow, and the evidence now took on a sharper, almost forensic intensity. The servant's evidence. Mary Miles, servant to Miss Lansdell of 36 Bedford Square, was the first to testify. She had seen the couple daily. Ellen, she said, did not appear to be ill when she first came, but 2 weeks later she became sick, first mildly and then severely, with bouts of vomiting 3 or 4 times a day, often producing a thick brown sediment. She described alarming weakness. "I'm losing everything, Mary. I feel so dreadfully weak." Mary also revealed that Dr. Warder rarely left Ellen's side except to fetch medicines. All nourishment and medicine passed directly through his hands. Ellen frequently complained of thirst, especially one night when the room contained a large canister of lemon ice, something ordered by the physicians, but left by Warder as her only sustenance overnight. The servant also noticed that Warder's own sudden illness on the day of the earlier inquest produced vomiting identical in colour and appearance to Ellen's. This detail caught the room's attention. The chemist's assistant. Edwin Butler, assistant to Mr. Smith of Western Road, confirmed that he had prepared several mixtures for Warder from spoken instructions only. The doctor collected the bottles himself. He added that Warder sometimes combined alkaline and acid preparations in ways that neutralized their medical effect entirely, something no trained physician should have done accidentally. The sister's testimony. Ellen's relatives gave the clearest sense of her decline and her fear. Mrs. Elliot Bramwell described Ellen as increasingly weak, taking almost nothing, yet always deferring to her husband's explanations. She recalled Ellen once receiving jelly she enjoyed very much, only for Warder to insist she could not keep food down. On visiting her one Thursday, she found Ellen asleep with her dress thrown carelessly over herself, one eyelid half open. When she gently touched it, the eyeball rolled from side to side in a way that deeply disturbed her. Miss Jane Vivian Bramwell. Ellen's younger sister had seen her in London before the couple travelled to Brighton. Ellen had described earlier attacks of strangury, bladder pain, and difficulty passing urine, eerily similar to her fatal and final illness. But one detail struck the jury. Ellen had confided that she believed this was the same illness as poor Annie died of, referring to Warder's second wife, Madame Valerie, whom she had known in Paris. More troubling still, she told her sister that Warder was giving her aconite, a most deadly poison. I would not touch it myself for the world, but he drops it for me. The jurors murmured audibly at that. Ellen had also spoken of her husband's desire that their marriage remained concealed for some months, because, she said, he did not wish the friends of his first or second wife to know of the third. The coroner reminded the jury that this could not formally be considered as evidence, but the implication was already clear. The pattern emerges. As the day progressed, one theme became impossible to ignore. Ellen had been previously healthy, suddenly ill only after her marriage, treated almost exclusively by her husband, and given medicine of his choosing, isolated from other caregivers, and repeatedly told she was suffering from hysteria. Her sisters and the servants all described the same baffling progression: brief improvement followed by sudden collapse and rapid decline. Adjournment for toxicological evidence. At this point, the coroner informed the jury that Dr Alfred Swaine Taylor had requested the assistance of Dr Wilkes, a physician with vast experience in unusual post-mortems. Their analysis was not yet complete. The inquest would therefore adjourn until Monday, when Dr Taylor's conclusion would be presented. Conclusions that would decide whether Ellen Warder died from natural causes or natural illness, or by deliberate administration of poison. When the inquest resumed on Monday, the atmosphere in the small room at the Olive Branch Inn had changed. The testimony of the sisters, the servant, and the chemist had already traced a troubling outline, but it was the toxicological evidence that completed it. Dr Alfred Swaine Taylor, assisted by Dr Wilkes, now presented his findings. The examination of Ellen's organs revealed no natural disease capable of explaining her death. The symptoms described by every witness, the vomiting, the burning thirst, the sudden collapses, the irregular heartbeat, the nervous agitation, pointed instead to a substance well known to medical men of the day: aconite, a deadly poison, rapid in action, difficult to detect, and, crucially, one that Warder himself had admitted administering. The jury listened as the pattern emerged with stark simplicity. A previous healthy woman, growing mysteriously ill only under her husband's exclusive care, given medicines he alone handled, showing symptoms consistent with aconite poisoning, and dying the very night he refused all outside assistance. Meanwhile, Warder's own final hours, his hasty departure, the letters he wrote, the disappearance of tincture from his bottles, and the discovery of the substance that ended his life, only deepened the implication that he understood precisely what awaited him once the analysis was complete. By the time Dr Taylor finished, The question whether the jury was no longer what had killed Ellen Warder, but who. The juries retired only briefly. From the Brighton Guardian, the 18th of July 1866, the Warder tragedy. Verdict of wilful murder against Dr. Warder. The jury barely put their heads together and at once agreed on their verdict. The foreman said that their verdict was that the deceased had died from some poison, most probably aconite, given by her husband and probably in small doses. The coroner. And given with the intention of causing death? The foreman. Yes. The coroner then said, Gentlemen, that amounts to a verdict of wilful murder. The foreman said, We believe he murdered her. The coroner then read to the jury the formal verdict, that Ellen Vivian Warder, aged 36 years, was feloniously, wilfully, and of malice and aforethought, killed and murdered by Alfred William Warder, her husband, since deceased, at number 36, Bedford Square in Brighton, and this was duly signed by all the jurors. Thus concluded the proceedings in this most painful case. With the jury's verdict delivered, the inquest into the death of Ellen Vivian Warder formally closed, but the questions it raised lingered long after the coroner's court fell silent. 3 wives, each dying suddenly, 3 illnesses marked by similar symptoms, and 1 man standing at the centre of them all, highly trained, outwardly respectable, and trusted implicitly within the intimate confines of the sick room. Ellen's case, more than the others, reveals the uneasy position Victorian women often occupied when illness struck. Medical authority lay almost entirely with the husband doctor. Symptoms could be reframed as hysteria, remedies administered without oversight, complaints dismissed as nervous exaggeration. Even close family hesitated to challenge a gentleman physician's confident assurances. It was only when her condition deteriorated beyond all reason, and when her surgeon brother insisted on outside help, that the tight ring of authority around her began to loosen. But by then, the window for intervention had already closed. The toxicologists of the age could detect many poisons, but aconite remained elusive. Its symptoms mimicked nervous disturbance. Its traces were subtle, and it acted swiftly. A determined hand, administering it in repeated small doses, could prolong illness long enough to look like a natural decline, but retain enough potency to ensure a fateful end. Dr. Taylor and Dr. Wilkes could not, in 1866, extract a definitive chemical signature from the preserved organs, yet the pattern of symptoms and the impossibility of any natural disease to explain them led the jurors to the only conclusion they felt justified. Their verdict, that she had been wilfully murdered by her husband, stands as an unusually stark announcement for a Victorian inquest. And yet, the man they named was beyond the reach of the law. From his actions, Dr. Warder ensured that no trial would ever be held, no defence mounted, no cross-examination heard. The verdict of wilful murder is therefore both final and strangely incomplete, a legal conclusion without judicial process, a story closed before every detail could be tested in court. For Ellen's family, there was no real resolution, only the knowledge that their concerns had been justified and that the truth, or as much of it as the coroner's court could reach, had finally been acknowledged. Today, the case sits uneasily among Victorian crime histories, a reminder of how easily domestic space could conceal danger, how medical authority could be misused, and how subtle a weapon poison could be in the hands of someone both knowledgeable and determined. And it leaves us with one last sober thought. Sometimes the most dangerous place for a Victorian woman to fall ill was it in the case of the person who claimed to know her best. Further particulars. And now, in the spirit of Victorian innovation, an age which could produce marvels of engineering and hazards of equal magnitude, we turn to the curious debut of a mechanical umbrella that proved rather more ambitious than its owner. The Illustrated Police News has the particulars. From the Illustrated Police News, Saturday the 14th of February, 1874. A singular accident occurred yesterday afternoon in Regent Street, occasioned by the recent introduction of a so-called self-opening patent umbrella, a contrivance which promises, we fear, to prove more energetic than the general public may desire. The purchaser, a respectable gentleman of middle age, had but moments earlier received a cheerful demonstration of the mechanism within the premises of the inventor, and was assured that the apparatus would deploy itself with a vigour hitherto unknown to the umbrella trade. Upon stepping into the street, the gentleman pressed the release button. The umbrella opened with such astonishing force that it knocked his hat clean from his head, struck a passing curate upon the shoulder, and startled a nearby horse, which made an indignant plunge and had to be soothed by its alarmed driver. Several witnesses, when interviewed, described the event as a mechanical explosion with fabric attached, and one lady stated that she had not witnessed such a spectacle since the fireworks at Sydenham. No serious injuries were reported, although the curate expressed mild surprise and the horse displayed signs of continuing distrust. The gentleman's hat was recovered some distance down the pavement, bearing no lasting damage beyond a wounded dignity. The inventor, when informed of these occurrences, maintained that the umbrella had performed exactly as intended, a declaration which has produced no small degree of public unease. A constable present remarked that if this represented the intended operation, he should be grateful not to witness the defective version. In consequence, the police advised citizens to exercise caution when employing mechanical contrivances whose enthusiasm for their own purpose appears to exceed that of the purchaser. And that is where this troubling case must end. A verdict delivered, a pattern recognised, but justice itself left unfinished. The law denied its chance to test the evidence because the one man who might have answered for it chose not to remain for the asking. A sombre story, and one that reminds us how thin the line could be in Victorian households between care and control, trust and danger. If you found this case interesting, or at the very least a welcoming companion to a properly brewed cup of tea, do tap anything beneath this video that looks encouraging. It signals to Mr. Algorithm that we are not, despite long-standing rumours, a channel dedicated exclusively to the ceremonial preparation of hot beverages. Important though that subject undoubtedly is, others already cover it with admirable vigour. And if you'd like more historical true crime, we are now approaching 900 episodes with a considerable archive of exclusive material available on Patreon. Membership is a mere £5 a month, and grants full access to the entire back catalogue, early ad-free releases, and the additional content that never appears on YouTube or anything else. This has been News of the Times, and I'm Robin Coles, amateur appreciator of eccentric Victorian doorbells, infrequent collector of seaside postcards depicting donkeys with improbable expressions, and a part-time archivist of railway announcements that no longer make sense to anyone. Thank you for watching. Wishing you peace and kindness. Good night.